In the arid lands of the American Southwest, where red cliffs rise like ancient cathedrals and the desert wind hums through narrow canyons, there once thrived a civilization both magnificent and mysterious, the Anasazi. Known today by the more respectful term ancestral Puebloans, they built vast stone cities in the mesas and cliffs of what is now Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. Between the 9th and 13th centuries, they mastered an unforgiving landscape, carving homes into cliff faces and erecting great houses with hundreds of rooms. Their architecture, aligned with the sun and stars, spoke of a deep connection to cosmic cycles. To outsiders, these settlements seemed eternal, sturdy fortresses of stone that could weather the centuries. But around the year 1300, something unthinkable happened. The Anasazi disappeared. Entire cities were abandoned. The fires in their hearts went cold. Their elaborate plazas fell silent. The desert reclaimed their fields. When modern archaeologists first uncovered places like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon, they were stunned. The precision of the masonry, the vast scale of the buildings, and the sophisticated irrigation systems told the story of an advanced, organized society. Yet no one could answer the biggest question. Why did they leave? The name Anasazi itself, given by the Navajo, means ancient enemies or ancient ones, a term laced with both awe and unease. Oral traditions from neighboring tribes spoke of famine, warfare, and even darker possibilities. Whispers of ritual sacrifice, cannibalism, and curses that drove people away. To this day, archaeologists debate the cause of their disappearance. Was it climate change? Prolonged drought? Conflict with neighboring peoples? Or did something far more mysterious happen in those final, desperate years? What is certain is that the Anasazi left behind more than stone walls. They left behind a sense of haunting, a feeling that in the silence of their abandoned homes, the past still lingers, watching. Standing in the shadow of a cliff dwelling, you can almost imagine the sound of drums, the scent of corn roasting over a fire, the flash of figures moving just out of sight. This is where our journey begins. In the ruins of a lost world, try to understand what happened when the sun, metaphorically speaking, died for the Anasazi. At the center of the Anasazi world stood Chaco Canyon, a vast complex of great houses and ceremonial kivas built with a precision that still amazes engineers today. Rising from the desert floor in what is now northwestern New Mexico, Chaco was more than a settlement. It was the beating heart of a civilization. Between 8900 and 1150, it became a hub for trade, religion, and governance, drawing people from hundreds of miles away. The canyon's great houses, such as Pueblo Bonito, loomed 5 stories tall and contained over 600 rooms. Their walls, made of meticulously shaped sandstone, were aligned with the solstices and lunar cycles. The Anasazi were master astronomers. Their buildings became calendars of stone, marking the movement of the heavens. From high atop Fajada Butte, priests may have observed the famous sun dagger, a beam of light slicing across spiral carvings during the summer solstice, symbolizing the balance between earth and sky. The roads leading into Chaco were as impressive as the buildings themselves. Perfectly straight, stretching for miles across the desert. They were not merely practical routes for travel. Archaeologists believe they held ceremonial significance, connecting Chaco to outlying communities in a web of sacred pathways. Trade goods found in the canyon. Turquoise from distant mines, shells from the Pacific, macaw feathers from Central America reveal the vast extent of their network. Life here thrived on maize agriculture, supported by intricate irrigation systems. Fields bloomed in the shadow of the canyon walls, and storehouses overflowed with corn, beans, and squash. But Chaco was more than a center of prosperity. It was also a place of ceremony and perhaps control. Some researchers believe its leaders wielded both political and religious power, uniting far-flung communities under shared rituals and cosmology. Yet beneath the grandeur, there are signs of tension. Archaeological evidence suggests social stratification. Elites buried with lavish goods, while commoners lived more humbly. There are hints of ritual violence. Human remains showing signs of trauma, and even possible cannibalism in times of crisis. By the late 1100s, the great houses began to empty. Construction slowed, then stopped altogether. The sun dagger, once a sacred marker of the seasons, fell silent as the priests and astronomers left. Something was happening, something that would soon ripple outward, touching every Anasazi settlement. The mystery deepens when you realize Chaco wasn't simply abandoned overnight. It was part of a slow, painful unraveling, a chain reaction of decline. And whatever forces drove the people from here would follow them to every corner of their world. Our journey now moves from the canyon to the high mesas, where another marvel and another clue wait in the cliffs. Far from Chaco Canyon, in the high plateaus of present-day Colorado, the Anasazi built their most iconic and awe-inspiring creations, the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. These villages, tucked into vast sandstone alcoves, seemed designed to defy both gravity and time. Some dwellings clung to the cliffside hundreds of feet above the canyon floor, accessible only by ladders and narrow stone steps. Cliff Palace, the largest of these settlements, contained over 150 rooms and 23 kivas, the circular ceremonial chambers that formed the spiritual core of Anasazi life. The stone walls, fitted so tightly that centuries of wind and rain could not break them, remain a testament to the skill of their builders. From here, residents could see miles of rugged landscape, a watchful vantage point against enemies, the weather, and perhaps something else. Life in Mesa Verde was harsh, but organized. Families lived in multi-room complexes, their days spent tending fields of corn, beans, and squash on the mesa tops. Water was scarce, carried up from springs below, or collected from seasonal rains. The kivas served as both sacred spaces and centers of community life, places where stories were told, ceremonies performed, and decisions made. But the cliff dwellings were not just homes, they were fortresses. Their placement suggests a need for defense, perhaps from raiding tribes or internal conflict. Archaeologists have found arrow points embedded in walls and signs of burned structures, hinting at violent encounters. By the late 1200s, even these seemingly impenetrable strongholds were abandoned. One after another, families packed up and left. The ladders were pulled away, the fires extinguished. What was left behind was eerie. Food stores still full, tools and pottery intact, as if the people had intended to return but never did. The abandonment of Mesa Verde mirrors the wider Anasazi collapse. Some scholars point to the Great Drought of 1276 to 1299, a decades-long dry spell that made farming nearly impossible. Others see signs of deepening social unrest, resource wars, or religious upheaval. Yet local Pueblo traditions tell of another force, a spiritual imbalance, an angering of the gods or spirits that dwell in the land. According to some oral histories, the people left not because they were defeated by human enemies, but because they feared something older, darker, and unseen. From the high cliffs of Mesa Verde, the view is breathtaking and unsettling. The empty windows of the dwelling stare back like hollow eyes, watching the canyons below. Standing there, you can feel the silence pressing in, as if the stones themselves remember what happened and are not eager to share it. The clues deepen as we move forward, not just in stone, but in the bones left behind. If the walls of Chaco and Mesa Verde tell the story of Anasazi ingenuity, the bones found in their ruins tell a darker tale. Archaeologists working across the Southwest have uncovered human remains that don't always match the expected patterns of peaceful village life. Some skeletons bear marks of violent death, fractured skulls, arrow wounds, and broken limbs. Others show signs of having been burned, dismembered, or cut in ways that suggest post-mortem processing. In rare but chilling cases, the evidence points toward cannibalism. Burned bone fragments mixed with food refuse. Cut marks on human bones similar to those seen on butchered animals, and even traces of human protein in ceramic vessels have been documented. Theories about these findings vary. Some researchers believe cannibalism may have been a desperate response to famine, particularly during drought years. Others suggest it could have been part of a ritual practice, intended to instill fear or assert dominance. In either case, the violence hints at a society under severe strain. Adding to the mystery are mass graves found in certain sites, containing men, women, and children buried together. Some of these burials are hurried, lacking the ceremonial care typical of Anasazi tradition. This suggests moments of crisis, sudden deaths from raids, disease outbreaks, or possibly something even less understood. The Pueblo descendants of the Anasazi rarely speak openly about this period, but some oral histories refer to times of great fear and moral breakdown. One story tells of a dark wind that swept to the villages, bringing death and discord. Another warns of spirits that punish those who break sacred laws, turning neighbor against neighbor. It's possible that famine, conflict, and spiritual crisis fed into each other in a downward spiral. Hungry people are desperate people, and desperation can shatter even the strongest social bonds. If the Anasazi leadership lost the trust of the people, chaos may have spread, making communities vulnerable to both internal and external threats. But while bones tell us something about the end, they don't tell us everything. The picture becomes clearer when we look at the land itself and what the climate was doing in those final centuries. One of the most widely accepted theories for the Anasazi disappearance is climate collapse. Specifically, the great drought that struck the Southwest between 1276 and 1299. Tree-ring studies show those years were marked by a near-complete absence of rainfall, devastating for a people whose agriculture relied on seasonal moisture. For centuries, the Anasazi had adapted to an arid environment. They built intricate irrigation systems, terrace fields, and check dams to conserve water. But even their ingenuity had limits. Without regular rains, cornfields withered, food stores dwindled, and hunger gnawed at every community. The drought didn't just cause crop failure. It rippled through every aspect of life. With fewer resources, competition between villages intensified. Raids became more common, alliances broke apart, and trust eroded. In times of abundance, religious ceremonies had celebrated harmony between humans and nature. In times of scarcity, those same ceremonies may have turned into desperate attempts to appease angry gods. Archaeological evidence from this period shows fortified settlements appearing more frequently, as well as signs of massacres. In some regions, entire villages relocated to more defensible positions high in cliffs or deep within canyons. Yet even these strongholds couldn't protect against hunger. For the Anasazi, agriculture was more than survival. It was a spiritual covenant. Corn wasn't just food. It was a sacred gift from the spirits. To fail to grow was to lose not just sustenance, but a connection to the divine order. Oral tradition suggests that during the drought, some communities believed the spiritual balance of the world had been broken. The sun dying in the title of our story may not refer to literal darkness, but to the symbolic extinguishing of life-giving warmth and fertility. Without rain, without crops, it might have felt as if the sun itself had turned its face away. When the drought finally broke, the Anasazi heartlands were already empty. The people had scattered, some joining other Pueblo groups to the south, others perhaps perishing in the migration. The once great cities of Chaco and Mesa Verde were silent, their kivas cold, their plazas empty. But drought alone cannot explain the totality of the disappearance. Other cultures have survived similar challenges. Something else, perhaps cultural collapse, spiritual crisis, or outside invasion, must have worked alongside the climate to seal their fate. To explore this, we need to look beyond the drought's end and into the migrations that followed. When the great drought and societal tensions became unbearable, many Anasazi communities began migrating southward and eastward. Archaeologists have traced this movement through pottery styles, architectural techniques, and settlement patterns that gradually appear far from traditional Anasazi core. The destinations varied. Some groups merged with the Hopi in present-day Arizona. Others joined the Zuni and various Rio Grande Pueblos in New Mexico. In these places, elements of Anasazi culture lived on, from their masonry styles to their agricultural practices and ceremonial traditions. Yet something changed in the process. The great stone cities and cliff dwellings of the past were abandoned in favor of smaller, more scattered villages. Why? Perhaps the trauma of losing their homeland made large, centralized settlements seem dangerous. Smaller communities could move more easily if threats arose. They could adapt quickly to shifting conditions, whether environmental or political. The journey south was not without peril. Oral histories from some Pueblo peoples describe waves of refugees arriving during a time of scarcity, straining resources and sparking conflicts. It's possible some migrations were met with resistance, leading to skirmishes or forced assimilation. Along the way, the Anasazi carried not only their physical possessions but their stories, songs, and spiritual knowledge. In many Pueblo ceremonies today, echoes of Anasazi beliefs remain, particularly the emphasis on harmony with nature and the cycles of the sun and moon. Yet the migrations also meant the loss of certain traditions. The monumental astronomy of Chaco, the cliffside fortresses of Mesa Verde. These were left behind, swallowed by the desert and forgotten by all but the wind. By the 14th century, the Anasazi as a distinct cultural entity had ceased to exist. They were absorbed into new identities, their name and history blurred into legend. But while their people lived on in new forms, the abandoned cities remained, silent witnesses to a lost era. And for those who returned centuries later, there was something unsettling about these ruins. Because in the empty dwellings, some claimed, the spirits of the past had never left. For the modern Pueblo peoples, the abandoned Anasazi sites are not simply historical curiosities. They are sacred places, imbued with the presence of ancestors and powerful spiritual forces. Many tribes consider them off-limits, not out of fear in a modern sense, but out of respect for the energies that still dwell there. Oral traditions speak of kachinas, spiritual beings who act as messengers between humans and the spirit world. In some accounts, the Anasazi may have lost a favor of these beings during their final years. Others hint that dangerous spirits, once bound by rituals, were released when the social order collapsed. Visitors to ruins like Chaco Canyon or Mesa Verde sometimes report strange sensations, sudden chills in the heat of summer, the feeling of being watched, and the sound of distant drumming carried on the wind. Whether these are products of imagination or something more is left to belief, but they echo the respect and caution with which indigenous people treat these sites. Archaeologists, while careful to avoid supernatural explanations, acknowledge that the Anasazi worldview was deeply spiritual. Every building, every kiva, every alignment with the sun and moon had meaning. To disrupt that balance might have been catastrophic in ways we struggle to understand today. Some legends go further, telling of shadow people who emerged during the last years, feeding on the chaos and suffering. These beings, it is said, follow those who violate sacred places. While such stories may serve as cautionary tales, they also reflect the intense atmosphere that must have hung over the final Anasazi settlements, a mix of fear, reverence, and resignation. Even now, descendants prefer the term ancestral Puebloans and avoid Anasazi, partly because of its Navajo translation as ancient enemies. Words carry power, and in this case, the name itself may be seen as a reminder of conflict and loss. Whether one believes in spirits or not, the emotional weight of the ruins is undeniable. The silence feels alive, as though the stones themselves are holding a memory too heavy to release. This brings us to the modern era, where science and legend continue to clash and sometimes converge in the effort to solve the mystery. Modern archaeology has brought extraordinary insights into Anasazi life, but has also stirred controversy. Excavations of sacred sites have at times angered Pueblo communities, who see the disturbance of ancestral graves and structures as deeply disrespectful. Laws like the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, now ensure the human remains and sacred objects are returned to descendant tribes. Some archaeologists argue that solving the mystery of the Anasazi disappearance requires digging deeper, literally. Others counter that the mystery is not for outsiders to solve, but for the descendants to preserve in their own way. Scientific findings point to a combination of environmental collapse, social upheaval, and migration, yet they cannot fully explain the emotional and spiritual dimensions of the event. For the Anasazi, leaving their cities wasn't just a matter of survival. It was the end of a way of life, a breaking of the bond between people, place, and cosmos. This tension between science and tradition shapes how the story is told today. Some historians focus purely on drought and conflict. Others incorporate indigenous oral histories, which often describe a departure as a necessary journey guided by prophecy, rather than a tragic collapse. One thing is certain. The ruins are not just relics. They are part of a living cultural heritage, still visited by descendants for ceremonies and offerings. Even when these places are closed to the public, they remain vibrant in the spiritual landscape of the Southwest. In this way, the Anasazi did not truly vanish. They transformed. But for the rest of the world, the image of empty stone cities under a blazing sun remains an irresistible mystery. And it is here in the blend of fact and legend that the haunting title of our story, When the Sun Died, takes on its full meaning. While drought, famine, and migration are widely accepted, fringe theories about the Anasazi disappearance persist. Some suggest massive epidemics wiped out entire communities, leaving survivors too few to sustain the old ways. Others imagine foreign invaders, perhaps from the north, overwhelming the Anasazi heartlands. More speculative still are the paranormal theories, alien abductions, dimensional shifts, or curses tied to celestial events. Such ideas find little support among scholars but thrive in popular culture, fueled by the sheer absence of definitive answers. One intriguing but grounded theory holds that the Anasazi may have intentionally dismantled their own society in response to prophecy. Certain oral traditions hint that the people were instructed by spiritual leaders to leave their homes and journey to new lands, carrying sacred knowledge to be preserved for future generations. In this view, the collapse was less a failure and more a transformation, a rebirth disguised as abandonment. What makes the Anasazi story so enduring is that it resists a single explanation. The evidence allows multiple narratives to coexist: tragic collapse, violent conflict, spiritual migration, and each one contains elements of truth. The mystery endures because the desert keeps its secrets well. Sand covers the trails, wind scours the carvings, and the sun bleaches the stones until the past feels just out of reach. But even in mystery, there is meaning. The ruins remind us of the fragility of civilizations, no matter how grand. They speak to the deep connections between people and the land, and to the consequences when that balance is broken. As we reach the final segment of our journey, we return to where we began, standing in the shadow of the ruins, listening for the echoes of the past. Imagine standing at sunset in Chaco Canyon. The sky is a blaze of red and gold, shadows stretching across the great houses. The air is still heavy with heat. In that moment, it's easy to believe you can feel the heartbeat of a lost world. For the Anasazi, the sun was more than light and warmth. It was the center of their spiritual and agricultural life. Its rising and setting marked the rhythm of the seasons, its cycles dictating when to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate. When the rains failed, when the crops died, it may have seemed as if the sun itself had abandoned them. The title, When the Sun Died, is not about a literal eclipse, but about the collapse of everything the Anasazi believed kept their world in balance. Without that balance, the great houses fell silent, the cliff dwellings emptied, and the people moved on, leaving behind only stone and shadow. Today, their descendants still honor the lessons of that time: the need for harmony with nature, the resilience to survive in harsh conditions, and the humility to know that nothing lasts forever. The ruins are not tombs. They are reminders, standing against the desert sky like the bones of great animal long gone, but never forgotten. As the last light fades, the canyon grows dark. The wind moves through the empty doorways, carry with it the whispers of a people who refuse to be defined by their disappearance. The Anasazi may have vanished from their cities, but they live on in the blood, the traditions, and the stories of those who came after. And perhaps that is a real ending, not mystery, but transformation, not death, but change. The sun, in a way, never truly died. It simply rose again in another place, for another people, in another form. Still, for those who stand among the ruins, the question lingers in the silence. What really happened here? And the stones, as always, keep their secret. History hides its darkest secrets in plain sight, and we're here to uncover them. If you love chilling history and ancient mysteries, subscribe to the Crit Stories now and join the search for the truth.